Hey guys, so to be really honest, this week I am not feeling the most well, so I have not really been able to think of a very original idea for this week's video, but I could not get out of my mind one comment that I saw. Someone told me to try to play a piece of music in a style that does not belong in the era in which that piece was written. So some of you are probably wondering, why is this so important? Well, with the development of music, there have been developments of kind of genres over time. It's kind of like how the pop of this decade sounds very different from, say, the pop of the 80s. You know, like when you hear the 80s, you know it's 80s music. Classical music as an umbrella genre actually works exactly the same. But instead of different decades of music, you basically have different centuries of music. Baroque music was somewhere around the 1600s. Then there was a morph in the next century or two into classical music, and then another morph in another century into romantic music, and then another century there was a morph into modern music, which is also known as 20th century music. And then from that we have the classical music of today, which covers a lot of different genres. So the classical music that is written today, you will actually hear it in soundtrack music for films, video games, everything, even commercials. So you'll get a lot of things that sound traditionally classical, but a lot of classical music these days is actually just straight up art. So for example, I did a piece by Dr. Robert Pritchard called Rebirth. I did interview him about it on this channel, so if you're interested, you can go take a look. I kind of regard that as classical music of today because it was written by a classically trained artist. So classical music is not just like a Mozart string quartet. That's usually what people think of, or they think of like Beethoven. But it's not just that. It spans a long period, and it works kind of just like pop music, just on a larger scale. As you can imagine, what I'm about to do with this piece of music I've chosen is kind of like if someone took a Justin Bieber song and made it like 80s style. It's kind of like, I think they're called postmodern jukebox. This is what they do. They take new pop music and then they put it in a totally different style. Someone asked me to do the classical version of that, so I have decided to kind of showcase to you guys the mistakes I made when I first approached Baroque music. The piece that I'm looking at is the Handel Sonata No. 3 in G major, Opus 1, No. 5, and I'm looking at the second movement, which is the Allegro. I will link a PDF to the actual music. It is on IMSLP, it is for free, it is public domain now, so you guys can go follow along. Disclaimer, I'm not feeling the most well right now, so I will probably make some mistakes. It is also extremely warm in this room right now. I am actually sweating. I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but hey, it's okay. We is gonna do this, okay? I'm just going to play a few phrases. Hopefully this video doesn't get copyrighted or whatever, but this is how I used to play it. If you have not studied Baroque music before, that probably sounded great to you. That probably sounded totally fine. However, that is not at all the way it would have been played in the era that this was written in. In the era that this was written in, the metal flute did not even exist, okay? It was not a thing. It was not a thing. What they had were Baroque flutes, although in that time they're just called flutes. So this flute just had a bunch of holes and like 2 keys, I think. And it was made from wood. Now the other thing that's different about that flute is that it is conical flute. So that means that it's wider on one end and narrower on one end. The metal flute that we have today is a cylindrical flute. It is even all throughout. The diameter up here is the same as the diameter down here. I had the privilege of studying Baroque flute for 1 year during my bachelor's. I did a bachelor's of music because I am that nerd. And I found that when you play a Baroque flute, it really does not project the same way that this thing does. It has a very kind of wispy, hollow sound. Think more panpipes, you know, like whoo, 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 whoo. It's not like whoo, which is like this flute. That completely changed my approach to Baroque music. I now pretend that I'm playing a Baroque flute on this. A couple of other things to keep in mind with Baroque music is that they treated dynamics completely differently. So they use what is called Terrace Dynamics. As far as I have been taught, Terrace Dynamics come from the fact that harpsichords back then, which are like basically the keyboard instrument of that time, the keyboard instrument of that time was a plucked instrument. It's not like now on the piano where it's a hammer and then it hammers the string. When you hammer the string, you actually have a lot more control over the exact dynamic you want. But if it's plucked, you don't actually have as much control. So they used Terrace Dynamics, which means that you play one little section soft, then you build it up suddenly like a terrace. Okay, you step up to like mezzo piano, and then in the next little section you step it up again to mezzo forte. So these little sections can range from very, very small, like half a bar, to like a full bar, or maybe even 2 bars. It really depends on the piece that you're looking at. The other thing is that Baroque music has a lot of sighing motifs. So what I mean is there's a lot of this da 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 ma da ma da. Now, if you think about it, typically when we think of classical and romantic music, like we do not think of that kind of gesture. That's why I played this straight, you know, like I played it like right? It's very straight, you know, like that's the way we're taught to play these days. We're taught to play with a lot of boldness, make each note matter. That was not the case in Baroque music. In Baroque music, every single time you come across something that is like a duple form, you always put more emphasis on the first note than on the second one to make it a sighing motif. And you even do this for ornaments. Ornaments are treated very differently in the Baroque era. A lot of ornaments were just kind of understood, you know, like they didn't actually write it down. Every time you saw a trill, you would actually start the trill from an appoggiatura, one note above it. So say you were trilling on D. Typically, in our era, we just read it as trilling starting from the D, and then we wiggle up to the E. Right? But in Baroque music, it was always understood that you started one note above and you did that sighing motif and you really leaned into one note above before you start the trill. And then they always do like a little turn at the end. Something like that. So now I am going to demonstrate this Handel Sonata in a more Baroque way. Now keep in mind, this is only my interpretation. It is not going to match other people's interpretation, okay? When it comes to Baroque music, you really have a lot of leeway in terms of how you want the music to go. So let's do this. Obviously that is not to my highest capability, but there you go. Sounds very different, right? You probably also noticed 2 extra things I did. For the longer notes, I did more of a bell-like gesture. So instead of going ba, I went ba, ba, you know, and you just kind of let it ring. That's a very, very Baroque thing to do. It's a lot easier to do on a Baroque flute than it is on a cylindrical flute. The other thing you might have noticed is that you probably heard a lot more kind of sudden phrase changes. It makes a lot more sense when you do it in the Baroque way. Because once you put in Terrace Dynamics, you can actually see where these sort of interrupting phrases happen. If you look at the dynamics in too fluid of a way, in the way that we are trained to see them in this day and age, we tend to be trained to see them in sort of the classical romantic-y sort of way. If you see it in that way, you're not going to see where the phrase changes. And that's what gets a lot of people when it comes to Baroque music. A lot of people will wonder why the phrase is going the way it is, why it's changing suddenly in the middle of them doing this lovely fluid crescendo. It doesn't really work with fluid crescendos. It works better with terrace dynamics. All right, so there you go. That is me playing a Handel sonata in a romantic-y way and in a Baroque-y way. I hope you guys enjoyed it and found it insightful. If you have any more questions or comments regarding what I showed you guys today, please leave it in the comments section below. I do read them. It's just been a little bit busy lately, but thank you for your responses from last week's video. If you like this video, make sure you give me a big thumbs up and hit subscribe for new videos every Saturday. My last video is over there, and if you want to catch me during the week, my social media networks are down there. But otherwise, I will see you guys next week. Bye. Yeah, I'm gonna try one more time just for good luck. Third time. Fourth time. Okay.